Well, friends, taking the light of God's Spirit on His Word, we turn now to the Epistle of Paul to the Colossians as we continue our studies in this part of God's Word. We're going to come tonight to verse 12, but I'm going to read again from the beginning because all context is so knit together. So Colossians 3, reading from verse 1, If ye then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is at the right hand of God. Set your affection on things above, not on things on the earth. For you are dead, and your life is hid with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then shall you also appear with him in glory. Mortify, put to death, therefore, your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is idolatry, for which things' sake the wrath of God cometh on the children of disobedience, in the which ye also walked sometime, when ye lived in them. But now you also put off all these: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth. Lie not one to another, seeing you have put off the old man with his deeds, and have put on the new man, which is renewed in knowledge, after the image of him that created him, where there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all and in all. And we come now to this verse tonight. Put on, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercies, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long suffering, forbearing one another, forgiving one another, and so on. Well, for the last few weeks we've been considering this chapter. You remember in the opening verses, Paul has told these believers in Colossae that they are to be seeking and setting. Seeking things that are above and setting their minds on them. He told them then in the first illustration that he used in the chapter that their old sinful desires and practices are to be put to death. Do not spare them. Mortify therefore, verse 5, your members which are upon the earth. You are to be continually seeking to put them to death. That's a lifelong work of sanctification. But we are not to be giving oxygen, if you like, to old sinful ways and desires. And if you give them oxygen, the fire will start again. Put it to death. Put that fire out in as much as you are able to do so. And then, perhaps you'll remember, the illustration changes. The truth is the same, but the illustration changes. And he spoke last week of putting off all that belonged to the old life, just as you would put off old clothes that were torn or stained, and you're putting on something new. And I think I made the point last week that we are not to be rummaging amongst the old clothes to see if we'll put it on again, the way a child might, maybe when they've been told to put something off and they want to go and find it again. No, leave it where it is. And he's not just making general points here, because we saw that in the midst of all of this teaching, he gives two lists of sins. Two lists of sins which Paul said they had to put off and put away. We saw the first list in verse 5. It's what we might call sensual sins. And then last week in verses 8 and 9, we saw the second list, what we might call social sins. Anger, wrath, malice, and lies, and so on. Sins, as I said last week, that we judge less important. I think I quoted what G. Campbell Morgan says, about that sort of sin. He said that they're sins in good standing. Sins in good standing. Well, we are to give them no more place than we are the other ones. Well, having seen the negatives, 2 lists of negatives in fact, we come now tonight to the positives. We have a second type of list here. Not the things that we're to put off, but the things that we're to put on. The new clothes, if you like, that the believer wears now in his Christian life. Things that are to be put on. Verse 12. Put on therefore. Now that's the second therefore we've had in this chapter. We saw the first one in verse 5. Mortify therefore. Now he's saying, put on therefore. Put on therefore. As the elect of God, holy beloved, bowels of mercies, and so on. Well, that will suffice for an introduction. As we come to this section tonight, I want to focus on verse 12, and I want us to notice 4 things that we find here. 4 things that we find here. Very quickly, first of all, we have repetition. We have repetition. Put on therefore as the elect of God, holy and beloved. There's a certain amount of repetition here. Paul has already spoken of putting off and putting on. And he says it again. He repeats himself because he wants to emphasize the point. He wants this illustration to really go home. He wants them to remember it. He wants them to apply it the next day and the day after. And it's good for us to have repetition as well, that we will remember, that you will remember, Christian friend, tomorrow or the day after, that you are to be putting off and putting on. He's told us several times because he knows how quickly we forget it. Like the Colossians, we need to hear the same thing again and again. We need to be reminded. We need to be reminded to put off. Put off what belonged to the old life. You are not the person you were before you were converted. You're not the finished article. You won't be until you go home to glory. But you are not what you were. So certain things have to stop and have to go. Certain attitudes, certain behavior that was typical of the way that you once lived, that has to be wiped out. There's no place for them in the Christian life, just as there's no place for them in heaven. So you're putting off and you're putting on. You're putting on new clothes. Just as certain habits and ways of thinking and acting have to be put off, new habits, new actions, new ways have to be put on, and put on, in a sense, every day. And we find here in verse 12 guidance on exactly what the new clothes are to be, how the Christian is to live. Warren Wiersbe has quite a catchy phrase here. He's good at that sort of thing. He has quite a catchy phrase here. He calls it putting off grave clothes and putting on grace clothes. Putting off grave clothes and putting on grace clothes. So that's the first thing. We have repetition. He's saying it again. The second thing we have is description. Repetition and then description. Before he begins to give us his list of things that we are to follow and do, he gives a brief description of the Christian. And we'll see in a moment why he does that. For as he describes the Christian, he describes them in 3 ways. He says, first of all, You are the elect of God. Verse 12. Put on, therefore, as the elect of God. The word elect means chosen, chosen of God. It applied in the Old Testament, of course, to Israel as a nation state. The Lord chose them as his own, and the Lord established them as his own. In the New Testament, of course, it applies to all of God's people. Now we read, and this is why we read that passage in Deuteronomy chapter 7. In Deuteronomy 7, verses 7 and 8, it's clear that it's a divine choice that's going on here. I don't want really to, I think it's just somebody who's turning. I don't want to get too deeply drawn into Deuteronomy 7 just now. But it's clear that it's a divine choice. I didn't choose you, he says in Deuteronomy 7, because you were more numerous or better than other people. In fact, he says, you weren't. Let's be honest. You were smaller and you were no better. It's a divine choice, whether it's Old Testament or New Testament. It doesn't depend on anything we are or really on anything that we do. Nobody deserves to be saved. People might say, well, I didn't deserve to be saved. You're right. Some other people might say to you, well, you don't deserve to be saved. They're right on that count. Nobody deserves to be saved. It's God's mercy that saves sinners, not dependent on who they are or what they do. He's pardons sin and he saves men and women out of his kindness and goodness. God saved sinners on the basis of what they deserved or on the basis of some work that they were doing. No one would be saved. No one would be saved. Not so. It's all on the basis of God's undeserved mercy and God's grace. So that's the first part of his elect of God. The second part of the description is that they are holy. Put on, therefore, as the elect of God, holy. Let's pause there. What does holy mean? Holy means set apart. Everything in the temple was holy. It was set apart. Set apart by God, for God. Set apart from the world. Set apart to follow him and to serve him. We see this, for instance, in the case of Abraham. There's Abraham. The Lord calls him to himself, and he sets Abraham apart. He's set apart from everybody else in his own day and generation. He was set apart by God to serve God. He sets his people apart from the world, and he puts them apart. If you're a Christian, you've been set apart. He took you out of the world, and he set you apart from it. We are not alone. We are bought with a price. Christians belong to the Lord. The third part of his description is that they are beloved. Put on, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved. In other words, God's choice of them isn't a cold choice. You know, you go into the shop and you choose things. You choose one thing of a shelf and you leave other things. Doesn't mean that much. And you might not remember in a few days what you chose. When God makes his choice, it's a choice of love. He loves those whom he has called. He loves those whom he has set apart. In love, he saves sinners. In love, he does all that is necessary for their salvation. My friends, God is love. Herein is love. Not that we love God, but that he loved us. Everything that's necessary for their salvation, from the very beginning to the minute they are in glory. In fact, until they're in glory, body and soul. Some use the phrase, God's special treasure, to describe the relationship of the believer to the Lord. And that's so true, isn't it? So, here's the description. They are elect of God, they are holy and beloved. Now, incidentally, if you're one of these, you're all three. You can't just be one out of three or two out of three. If you've got one, you've got all. Got one, you've got all. Satan will say to you, well, maybe you were chosen of God, but he doesn't love you. No, no, no. The whole thing is tied together. No pulling bits out. So, what have we got? We've got repetition. Good on. We've got description. But you know, this description that Paul is giving here is more than just description. It's also, and this is my third point, it's also motivation. It's also motivation. The description he's given, elect of God, holy and beloved, it's a motive for them to do what he's going to tell them to do. Why should we do it, Paul? Why should we put on? You should put on because you are elect of God, holy and beloved. That's why. The description is a motivation for all that follows. Because you're beloved of God, because you were set apart, you are to be doing certain things. You are to be the more diligent in putting off and putting on. In other words, the love and the work of God for them and in them is the strongest motive to do what the Lord wants. If you love me, keep my commandment. And then there's another motivation in verse 13. How does he put it? As Christ forgave you. Now, I don't want to go into verse 13 tonight, but that's another motivation. Isn't it? Another motivation. God's forgiveness of sin is a motive to put on what is right. Satan will tell you, you can't sin anyway and God will forgive you. Grace is free, but it's not cheap. So what do we have? We have repetition. Put on, put on. We have description. Put on us, those, the elect of God, holy and beloved. We have motivation. Because you are holy and beloved. Put on. Well, finally, we have instruction. At last, we're coming to our list, where he gives the new clothes that we are to put on. What's the first item? Well, the first item in verse 12 is bowels of mercies. Put on, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercies. That means tender mercies. Live and give and show tender mercy. Now, the Greeks used this expression, the bowels of mercies. Sounds very strange to our idea, to our minds, but in those days, they reckoned that the deepest emotions, the seat of our emotions, was somewhere down here in our intestinal area. We tend to think of it more as the heart. They thought of it just that bit lower down. It's the same thing. What it's saying is this: from the depths of your being, extend mercy. Let mercy be what springs up in your dealings with men and women. Let it be tender mercy. Because after all, it's tender mercy that God gave you. After all, it's from the depths of his being that he extends mercy to you. you do the same. You do the same. Now you're saying, well, can I choose who I extend mercy to? Well, as the Bible says, if you're only going to extend it to people that are easy to extend it to, he says, the wicked do the same. Nothing special about that. No, you are to seek grace, to be merciful, and to be merciful perhaps to those who are not merciful to you. Be patient with those who are impatient with you. As we're speaking about Joseph the other day and his brethren, and that's what he shows. Depth of compassion he extends to them. After all they had done. I often wonder how I would have met them when they turned up with their empty sacks and their empty tongues. The depth of compassion, bowels of mercy. What does bowels of mercy mean? Read Genesis, and you'll find out what it means. And it's not a turn off, turn on switch. It's to be an attitude of life. Luke 6:36. Here's the words of the Lord himself. Be ye therefore merciful, as your Father is also merciful. Be merciful like God. Let your mercy have a savour of God's mercy about it. Thy mercy, Lord, is in the heavens. It's high. It's up there. Be known as a merciful person. Not quick to judge, not too quick to reach hasty conclusions, not quick to come down like the proverbial ton of bricks on some poor soul who has crossed our path inadvertently at the wrong moment. Well, you say it's my nature. Yeah, it is. But that just means that you'll need more grace and need to work more. Be known as merciful people. But there's a second piece of clothing we're to put on. Verse 12 again. Put on therefore as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercies, kindness. Well, kindness doesn't need any explanation. We all know what kindness is. We know what unkindness is. We know what it looks like. We are saved because of God's kindness to us through Christ. In God's kindness, he looked on us when he could have passed us by. In God's kindness, he called you out of darkness into his light. In God's kindness, let's go to Psalm 40, seeing we're studying it. In God's kindness, he took you out of the pit, the horrible pit and the miry clay. In God's kindness, he put your feet on a rock and he established your goings. In God's kindness, he put a new song in your mouth. It's all kindness. All kindness. In kindness, he keeps you. How much mercy and kindness has he shown you today? Let's take these two things together, mercy and kindness. How much mercy and kindness has God shown to you today? Let's just limit it to today. In fact, let's just limit it to this afternoon and this evening. How much mercy and kindness has he shown? And he's shown that at infinite cost. It's not so long since we looked at Zacchaeus. He receives mercy and kindness. And he also shows mercy and kindness. He's going back and he's putting things right. He's restoring fourfold. In the old life, in Zacchaeus' old life, there wasn't much mercy or kindness. He was a greedy, grasping thief. You avoided Zacchaeus. You hoped his eye didn't fall on you. And he's known for mercy and kindness. Today is salvation come to this house, says the Lord. We who received kindness must bestow kindness. Ephesians 4:32. And be ye kind one to another, tender heart, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. Why do we say so and so was not very kind to me? How kind were you when the Lord showed you kindness? In your relation to himself. Now, as I was considering this over the past number of days, I noticed that several commentaries, when they were wanting an illustration for this, went to the same place in the Old Testament. There's one Old Testament example of kindness. I wonder if you can just think which one it is. It's from David. It's from David, and yes, it's Mephibosheth. You remember David's kindness to Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son. 2 Samuel 9:3. And the king said, Is there not yet any of the house of Saul that I may show the kindness of God? Kindness God to him. And what kindness David showed? I was hoping I would have more time to go into David and Mephibosheth, but I'll just mention things. He noticed him. That was a kindness. He inquired after him. That was a kindness. He sent for him. He spoke to him. He restored his lands for him. He arranged for Ziba to look after everything for him. He fed him at his table. Now that was extraordinary by the standards of that day. By the standards of that day, the new king showed zero kindness and zero mercy to all the old king's family. You cut them off. This is what grace does. It does what is counter-covenant, what goes against the covenant of the day. The Christian life is counter-covenant. It's to be counter-covenant. It does the very opposite of what the world does. David acts like a shepherd to this poor lame sheep, Mephibosheth, because the Lord was his shepherd. What were we singing in Psalm 112? A good man doth his favour show, and doth to others remain. We're going to sing something very similar in 37. You see where the motivation I spoke of comes in. Put on therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercy, kindness. Maybe if you weren't beloved and saved, maybe it would be different, but you are. Therefore, because you are, therefore. I was speaking of David and Mephibosheth. Well, we have experienced far greater kindness than Mephibosheth. ever receive. Put on therefore as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels and mercies, kindness. Now clearly, I'm not going to finish the verse tonight. And that's a good point to stop, because in the next one he moves on to something else. Humility. And that deserves more time than I'm going to be able to give it just now. So we have repetition, description, motivation, and instruction. Keep on there. Vows of mercies and kindness. Well, may God help us to understand these things. Give us grace to apply these things, to realize that it's repeating it, so that we'll grasp all of it. We'll sing it.